Hey there, everyone. Pastor Lauren here. Welcome back to Firmly Planted for Difficult Faith Questions Part 2. This week, I want us to explore one question that seems to come up again and again and again throughout life. Actually, it's a question that people have been asking for a very, very long time, since the very beginning of the world. Why do bad things happen? Why is there suffering? How do we make sense of evil or pain in the world? The question also gets asked this way: how could a good and loving God, a God who loves the whole world, allow there to be pain, allow there to be suffering? And I want to teach you a big, fancy theological word. The word is theodicy. Theodicy is the attempt of trying to make sense of that question, trying to answer the question, how could a good and loving God allow suffering in the world? And so that's the question that I want us to focus on. It's a question that's relevant today with the reality that close to 2 million, or maybe now over 2 million people have been infected with this virus, the coronavirus, and over 100,000 people have died as a result. Where is God in the midst of that? How could God allow a virus to spread? I want to start off by saying it's a great question, and I won't pretend to offer up an easy answer. So the big reveal here is this: I don't know. Honestly, I don't know why God allows suffering. You might find a lot of people of faith, good people of faith, try to answer that question, or they try to quote Bible verses and they try to come up with easy answers for what is actually a really mysterious question. The truth is, nobody knows why God allows suffering. We can try to make sense of it, but at the end of the day, the most honest answer I have for you is that I don't know. I ask that same question. When I was in the Army and deployed to Iraq, there was a lot of suffering all around, and that was a question that I asked a lot. The truth is, suffering is everywhere in the world, and it always has been. When the earthquake happened in Haiti, it instantly killed countless people. We asked the same question: God, how could you allow this earthquake to kill people? Bad things happen in our world, and sometimes we want an easy answer, but it's not always helpful. So my honest answer to the first question is I don't know. I don't. But I do take comfort in the fact that the story of our God speaks directly into the heart of suffering. So let's think about the story of Jesus. The story of Jesus that we hold on to as people of Christian faith is that God would come to earth, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the creator of you and me. God would come to earth as Jesus and would experience pain and would become human suffering. We just got through with Holy Week, and the last week of Christ's life, it reveals to us that our God is not necessarily one that totally takes away pain, but rather Jesus would become pain. Jesus would become suffering. Jesus would suffer. He was abandoned by his best friends. He was betrayed by them. He was falsely accused of a crime he did not commit, trying to overthrow the Roman Empire. He was beat, stripped naked, and crucified on a cross. He died, and some of his final words hanging on the cross were, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Even on the cross, Jesus couldn't make sense of how God would allow him to suffer. But what this story teaches us is that in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our suffering, we can take a sense of comfort that the Christian faith shows us that God knows what it's like to suffer. Jesus knows what it's like to suffer. And this is what we mean when we say we have the theology or the belief about God of the incarnation. Incarnation is another big, fancy theological word that means God in the flesh. The God who would take on human form would know all of our pain. So where is God in the midst of suffering? My answer is often God is experiencing suffering. God is in pain because God loves humanity so much that God would take on our pain, would take on our suffering. But we also have hope. The story of Jesus doesn't end with suffering. It doesn't end with a crucifixion. It ends with a resurrection. And so as people of faith, we experience both the cross of Jesus and the empty tomb of Jesus. A lot of times we spend more time on the cross. We have pain. We have suffering. Our hearts break. We get viruses. Loved ones of ours pass away and die. And always in those moments, we cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that's what we should cry out. Sometimes we feel the temptation that when a friend of ours is going through a hard time, maybe they've gone through a breakup, or they didn't make the sports team, or they're really depressed, our temptation is to just say, oh, cheer up. God will work everything out. But the response that I think we're encouraged to give is, oh, this sucks. And I'm sorry. God, where are you? It's okay for us as people of faith to wonder and question and scratch our head and cry out to God. But we are also people who are given this story, the promise of the resurrection. And so we're encouraged to also take good comfort and take heart that God has overcome the world, that just as the tomb of Jesus would become empty, God would raise him from death and bring him to new life. We will be raised too. And so we know the end of the story, that even though there's pain and there's suffering and there's heartache and there's hardship in the world, at the end of the day, there's going to be new life and new hope. What comes after death is new life. I want to tell you a really quick story. I was in college at Ohio State, and I'll never forget, I was at Jacob's Porch, the campus ministry there, and I was hanging out with the pastor there, Pastor Jay at the time. This was before our beloved Pastor Grant went to Jacob's Porch. And we were hanging out one day, and the door to the church opened up, and in came this student. And she was in tears, just crying and crying and crying. And so I kind of freaked out, didn't know what to do. But so I kind of stepped back, and Pastor Jay went over to comfort her and said, "What is wrong? Are you okay?" She was crying and crying and crying. And she said, he broke up with me. So obviously she had a boyfriend who broke up with her, and she was just devastated by this. And Pastor Jay, I remember him saying something like, "Tell me how you're feeling," or tell me what's going through your head, and crying with tears just streaming down her face. She said, "It feels like death. It just feels like death." And if you've ever had your heart broken, you know what that feels like. Maybe it wasn't a relationship, but you had a loved one who died, or you were worried about something. Our pain often feels like death. And I'll never forget, as Pastor Jay wrapped his arms around her, he said to her, "And what does the story of Jesus teach us comes after death? What does the story of Jesus remind us about what comes after death?" And through her tears and through her sobbing, she said, new life. I know that after death comes new life. The world would have us think that the order is we live, and then we die, right? Life and then death. You're born and then you die. one of the mysteries of the Christian faith is that our theology, our belief about God, actually would have us reverse that. Life is actually a series of experiencing death and then new life. It's the circle of life. We think about a tree in the fall, right? All of the leaves fall off the tree. And for many months, December and January and February and even into March, there are no leaves on the tree. But then comes April and May and June and July and August. And all of those months, the trees are filled with green leaves. Unless those leaves, though, fall off again and die in the fall, new leaves will not grow. There's a cycle to this life. God has woven into the fabric of this life this rhythm of death to new life. It's not just a metaphor for us as people of faith. It's our very theology. It's what we believe is the thing that is most true about creation. That God always creates new life out of death. I don't believe that God causes suffering. I don't believe that God has some evil plan to cause pain. I just think that pain and suffering are a part of creation. They're a part of life. It's a part of being human. I don't think we can have human life without pain. Sometimes we cause that pain. We hurt one another, we hurt ourselves, we hurt creation. But sometimes pain and suffering is caused in a mysterious way. Earthquakes and tornadoes and rain and viruses that spread. It's a mystery to us. I don't think God causes it. But what I do trust is that out of pain, out of suffering, God can create new life. The story of Jesus teaches us that we don't need to be afraid of pain and suffering, that God has experienced all of the pain that this world has to offer. Think about all of the pain Jesus experienced. His best friends betrayed him. His other friends ran away and didn't come to his defense. He was made fun of, falsely accused. He was physically beaten. He was nailed to a cross, and his own mom had to watch him die as he hung on the cross, utterly forsaken. And yet, his story doesn't end with pain. It ends with an empty tomb and new life and new hope. And so as people of faith, we can run straight into pain and suffering. And we are allowed to grieve and to cry just like Jesus did. But we're also given hope to believe that because the tomb of Jesus is empty, our tombs will be empty too. That the worst thing that could ever happen to us will not be the last thing. So in summary, 3 points. Why does a good God allow there to be pain in the world? I don't know. I wish I did, but I don't know. Point number 2, the story of Jesus shows us that God knows what it's like to be in pain because Jesus experienced suffering. So we can take comfort in this God who knows what our pain is like. Point number 3, the story doesn't end in pain. It ends in new life. The cycle of life is death to new life, death to new life. Out of every tragedy can come a new opportunity to live with new perspective. There's a verse in the Bible that says suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And we do not disappoint in having the hope of Jesus. Suffering produces endurance, endurance character, and character hope. I hope that this video has helped. Maybe it's brought up more questions than you had to begin with. Welcome to the journey of faith.